Morning. Praise be to God. Let me begin by thanking the entire Vermont Avenue Baptist Church family for welcoming our family here today. It feels like a family. Thank you for making us feel that way. To Pastor Wheeler, First Lady Wheeler, thank you so much for welcoming us here today. Congratulations on Jordan Denise, a.k.a. Cornelia. Michelle and I have been blessed with a new nephew this year as well, Austin Lucas Robinson. So maybe at the appropriate time we can make introductions. Now, if Jordan's father is like me, then that'll be in about 30 years. That is a great blessing. Michelle and Malia and Sasha and I are thrilled to be here today. And I know that sometimes you have to go through a little fuss to have me as a guest speaker. So let me apologize in advance for all the fuss. And we gather here on a Sabbath during a time of profound difficulty for our nation and for our world. And in such a time, it soothes the soul to seek out the divine in the spirit of prayer, to seek solace among a community of believers. But we are not here just to ask the Lord for His blessing. We aren't here just to interpret His scripture. We're also here to call on the memory of one of His noble servants, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Now, it's fitting that we do so here within the four walls of Vermont Avenue Baptist Church. Here, in a church that rose like a phoenix from the ashes of the Civil War. Here in a church formed by freed slaves whose founding pastor had worn the Union blue. Here in a church from whose pews congregants set out for marches, from whom choir anthems of freedom were heard, from whose sanctuary King himself would sermonize from time to time. And one of those times was Thursday, December 6th, 1956. And Pastor, you said you were a little older than me, so were you around at that point? You were 3 years old. Okay. I wasn't born yet. On Thursday, December 6th, 1956. And before Dr. King had pointed us to the mountaintop, before he told us about his dream in front of the Lincoln Memorial, King came here as a 27-year-old preacher to speak on what he called the challenge of a new age. The challenge of a new age. It was a period of triumph, but also uncertainty for Dr. King and his followers. Because just weeks earlier, the Supreme Court had ordered the desegregation of Montgomery's buses. A hard-wrought, hard-fought victory that would put an end to the 381-day historic boycott down in Montgomery, Alabama. And yet, as Dr. King rose to take that pulpit, the future still seemed daunting. It wasn't clear what would come next for the movement that Dr. King led. It wasn't clear how we were going to reach the promised land, because segregation was still rife. Lynchings still a fact. Yes, the Supreme Court had ruled not only on the Montgomery buses, but also on Brown versus Board of Education. And yet, that ruling was defied throughout the South by schools and by states. They ignored it with impunity. And here in the nation's capital, the federal government had yet to fully align itself with the laws on its books and the ideals of its founding. So it's not hard for us then to imagine that moment. We can imagine folks coming to this church, happy about the boycott being over. We can also imagine them, though, coming here concerned about their future. Sometimes second-guessing strategy, maybe fighting off some creeping doubts, perhaps despairing about whether the movement in which they had placed so many of their hopes, a movement in which they believed so deeply, could actually deliver on its promise. So here we are, more than half a century later, once again facing the challenges of a new age. Here we are, once more marching toward an unknown future, what I call the Joshua generation to their Moses generation, the great inheritors of progress paid for with sweat and blood and sometimes life itself. We've inherited the progress of unjust laws that are now overturned. We take for granted the progress of a ballot being available to anybody who wants to take the time to actually vote. We enjoy the fruits of prejudice and bigotry being lifted slowly, sometimes in fits and starts, but irrevocably from human hearts. It's that progress that made it possible for me to be here today, for the good people of this country to elect an African American, the 44th President of the United States of America. Reverend Wheeler mentioned the inauguration, last year's election. You know, on the heels of that victory over a year ago, there were some who suggested that somehow we had entered into a post-racial America. All those problems would be solved. There were those who argued that because I had spoke of a need for unity in this country, that our nation was somehow entering into a period of post-partisanship. That didn't work out so well. There was a hope shared by many that life would be better from the moment that I swore that oath. Of course, as we meet here today, 1 year later, we know the promise of that moment has not yet been fully fulfilled. Because of an era of greed and irresponsibility that sowed the seeds of its own demise, because of persistent economic troubles unaddressed through the generations, because of a banking crisis that brought the financial system to the brink of catastrophe, we are being tested in our own lives and as a nation as few have been tested before. Unemployment is at its highest level in more than a quarter of a century. Nowhere is it higher than the African American community. Poverty is on the rise. Home ownership is slipping. Beyond our shores, our sons and daughters are fighting two wars. Closer to home, our Haitian brothers and sisters are in desperate need. Bruised, battered. Many people are legitimately feeling doubt, even despair, about the future. Like those who came to this church on that Thursday in 1956, folks are wondering, where do we go from here? I understand those feelings. I understand the frustration and sometimes anger that so many folks feel as they struggle to stay afloat. I get letters from folks around the country every day. I read 10 a night out of the 40,000 that we receive. And there's stories of hardship and desperation in some cases, pleading for help. I need a job. I'm about to lose my home. Don't have health care. It's about to cause my family to be bankrupt. Sometimes you get letters from children. My mama or my daddy have lost their jobs. Is there something you can do to help? 10 letters like that a day we read. So yes, we're passing through a hard winter. It's the hardest in some time. But let's always remember that as a people, the American people, we've weathered some hard winters before. This country was founded during some harsh winters. The fishermen, the laborers, the craftsmen who made camp at Valley Forge, they weathered a hard winter. The slaves and the freedmen who rode an underground railroad seeking the light of justice under the cover of night, they weathered a hard winter.